Robotics, I think people use it in all kinds of different ways. Generally, I use it in a pretty broad definition as well as anything that uses a computer-driven processor to operate different forms of exoskeletons or drives or to process sensory input. So in some ways you could say it's more of a wearable computer plus and minus an effector. So that effector could be a drive, it could be sort of a pendulum kind of thing or a lever, things like that. So some people even use, like if it's kind of a computer, they call that kind of robotic technology. And one of the leading causes of disability in the country is multiple sclerosis. And we don't have a lot of great therapies for that right now. There's a number of medications coming down the pipeline that could help to regenerate, repair the nervous system, and that'll be fantastic. However, right now, exercise and rehabilitation is probably the easiest, most accessible option. And the reason robotics are really interesting is that they're great at providing lots of therapy. They can handle high work demands. They provide rigorous and also reproducible series of training, which sometimes rehabilitation is very geographically variable. So what you might have in Indianapolis, where we are right now, might be different in Phoenix, might be different in New Jersey, might be different in San Francisco. So it really kind of standardizes the level of care. We've also shown rehabilitation can help people with gait disabilities using body weight support training. Now, unfortunately, most of the robots developed are not for MS, they're mostly for stroke. So it requires us to adapt and take the best that we've learned from people with stroke and adapt it to the unique characteristics of people with MS, which may mean long-term disability, so it may be relatively low disability now, but over time it gets worse, so you need to adapt for that long-term. But short-term, people with MS tend to have a lot of fluctuations through the course of the day in terms of fatigue, for example. So this will require smart and adaptive technology for that. Think about people with MS in particular, you're going to have to have a certain level of disability. And in my presentation, what I talked about is, right now, like say this is how much functional capacity a person has when they're healthy, and over time might fall below that, and maybe a little bit of assistive training or rehab or exercise might bring you back to being sufficiently capable. When we get the new regenerative drugs that come on board, we might be able to fill that with the new therapy, then you have more exercise, you come back up here again. Once your disability gets more severe, you may need to do all three: regenerative therapies, exercise rehab, and assistive therapies. But I kind of think it can help almost everybody that has a disability. So there's three types of robots that we're talking about. One is a fixed base, so basically all the hardware is contained on a pedestal. The person grabs an end effector and they train this in a clinic, for example, or a lab. Other kind of robotics are exoskeletons, so it might be adhered to this wall, comes down over my arm, a little bit like that Matt Damon movie, except it's connected to the wall and you kind of help do things like that. And other robots could be almost more like the Matt Damon robot, where you actually wear the robot and it works both as a therapeutic device as well as assistive device. And I kind of think the wearable home use ones is kind of the direction things are going to go. Lightweight, long battery life, smart and adaptive. And I think that'd just be a wonderful technology that no one's making right now that could come in the future. In order for it to be accessible, someone will have to pay for it. So therefore, the proper clinical trials will need to be done because unless you can show efficacy or value added, it'll be difficult to justify like an insurance company to pay for it. So that's not happening right now with a lot of technologies. People are generally making the devices and just selling the devices, which if you can't spend $7,000 or $15,000 for a functional electrical stimulation unit, like for your leg, and no one's gonna be able to spend $50,000 or $60,000 or $70,000 for one of these. But drugs cost that much too in that range, but they can because there's reimbursement for it. The technology does exist for some of these robots in terms of the components, the processors, and they're coming really from the products from DARPA. So DARPA had a big initiative about 2006 where they spent quite a bit of money looking at prosthetic limbs to improve the prosthetic limbs of people coming back from the recent wars. And these limbs are basically probably a couple $100,000. DARPA spent $144 million in R&D on a couple of arms, but they're lightweight, they're small, they do a lot of different things, and we'd have to borrow that technology in order to do it. And I guess the optimist in me would think as the volume goes up, price will go down, technology is getting cheaper, but at the end of the day, it's never going to be a $10 kind of a piece of equipment.